The crystalline walls of the Galactic Council chambers pulsed with an ominous red glow as the verdict echoed through the vast hall. Jinwoo Park stood in the defendant's circle, energy shackles humming around his wrists, while 12 alien judges loomed above him like ancient gods passing judgment on a mortal. Their translucent forms shifted through spectrums of light that hurt human eyes to observe directly, each pulse of color representing emotions that no terrestrial language could adequately describe. Human designation Jinwoo Park. The lead arbiter's voice resonated through both sound and direct neural interface, causing Jinwoo's teeth to ache. You stand accused of reckless endangerment of protected sentient ecosystems, criminal negligence in the operation of interstellar vessels, and violation of the sacred preservation codes of the Villani sovereignty. Jinwoo kept his expression neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. 3 months ago, he had been hauling agricultural supplies to the Outer Rim colonies when his ship's hyperdrive had catastrophically failed. The emergency drop from hyperspace had landed him directly in Villani space, and his subsequent crash landing had left a 2-kilometer scar across one of their precious nature preserves. The fact that he had been unconscious during the entire event seemed irrelevant to the Council's sense of justice. Ambassador Hye-Jin Kim sat in the observer's gallery, her knuckles white as she gripped the railing. As the official representative of the Human Colonial Authority, she had fought for 3 months to get Jinwoo a fair trial. The result had been this theatrical display of alien superiority, with predetermined outcomes wrapped in the veneer of judicial process. The damage to preserve Sector 7 Gamma represents an irreplaceable loss to galactic biodiversity, continued a secondary judge, their forms shifting to aggressive orange hues. 17 species of microfungi, unique to that specific soil composition, have been rendered extinct by your vessel's contamination protocols. Jinwoo had to bite back his first response. He wanted to point out that his emergency sterilization systems had probably prevented far worse contamination, but experience had taught him that logic rarely factored into council proceedings where humans were involved. The galaxy's established species had made their position clear from humanity's first contact. Earth's children were dangerous wildcards who disrupted the careful balance that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. However, the lead arbiter continued, their tone shifting to something resembling satisfaction. This council recognizes that your actions may not have been entirely malicious in intent. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Ambassador Kim leaned forward, hope flickering in her dark eyes. Therefore, rather than the standard sentence of molecular dissolution, this council sentences you to corrective exile on the world designated Keth 7, where you will have the opportunity to reflect upon the consequences of human recklessness until such time as the damaged ecosystem regenerates. The hope in Kim's expression died instantly, replaced by horror. Several alien spectators made sounds that their translation devices rendered as amused chittering. Jinwoo himself remained perfectly still, though his mind was racing through everything. He knew about Keth 7. The planet existed in galactic records primarily as a cautionary tale. Originally discovered by the Thakari Empire 2 centuries ago, it had been designated as a maximum security prison world for their most dangerous criminals. The experiment had lasted exactly 18 months before being abandoned as economically non-viable due to complete prisoner mortality rates. Since then, it had served as the galaxy's ultimate punishment, exile to a world so hostile that death was considered a mercy. The sentence is to commence immediately, announced the arbiter. Galactic Corrections Officer Tae-Min Lee will oversee the transportation and deployment of the condemned. A nervous-looking human stepped forward from the court staff section, his corrections uniform impeccably pressed but his hands visibly shaking. Tae-Min had been working for Galactic Corrections for 8 years, ever since humanity had been granted limited participation in council institutions. He had overseen hundreds of deportations to prison colonies, but never to a Deathworld. The Meikyo assignment was either a cruel joke or a test of human loyalty to galactic law. As the energy shackles tightened around Jinwoo's wrists, Ambassador Kim shot to her feet. I formally protest this sentence on behalf of the Human Colonial Authority. Exile to Keth 7 is tantamount to execution without trial. Your protest is noted and rejected. the lead arbiter replied with dismissive coldness. The human will have every opportunity to survive if he possesses sufficient adaptability. The way the alien pronounced the word made it clear that they considered human adaptability to be vastly overrated. Jinwoo finally spoke for the first time since the trial began. How long is the sentence? Until the ecosystem you damaged returns to its previous state, came the reply. Galactic xenobotanists estimate this will require approximately 400 standard years. A few spectators made those chittering sounds. Again. Everyone in the chamber understood that this was a death sentence with extra steps. As Corrections Officer Lee led Jinwoo from the chamber, the condemned man caught Ambassador Kim's eye and offered her a slight nod. She had done everything possible within the system. What happened next was beyond diplomacy. The transport bay of the council station buzzed with activity as various species went about their daily business, carefully avoiding the area where the prisoner transport was docked. The sleek vessel bore the markings of galactic corrections, its hull designed to survive passage through the most dangerous regions of space. It would need every bit of that durability for the journey to Keth 7. Taemin Lee checked his equipment nervously as they boarded. Standard procedure required him to monitor vital signs during transport and confirm successful deployment. What the manual didn't explain was how to cope with watching a fellow human being fed to a planet that had devoured every living thing the galaxy had ever sent to its surface. Officer Lee, Jinwoo said quietly as they strapped into their seats. You don't have to make this more difficult than it already is. The younger man looked up from his checklist, surprise evident in his features. I'm sorry? You're acting like you're taking me to an execution, Jinwoo explained. Maybe you are. But right now, we're just two humans on a ship, heading somewhere. Nobody wants to go, no point making it weird. Taemin stared at him for a long moment, then managed a weak smile. You're remarkably calm for someone who just got sentenced to the worst planet in known space. Jinwoo shrugged as the transport's engines began their startup sequence. I've had worse Tuesdays. The comment drew a genuine laugh from the corrections officer, breaking some of the tension that had filled the cramped cabin. As they departed the council station and made the jump to hyperspace, both men settled in for the 3-day journey to Keth 7. Neither of them spoke about the statistical probability of Jinwoo's survival. The galaxy's databases were quite clear on that subject. 0%, with a margin of error so small as to be meaningless. Outside the transport's viewports, hyperspace flowed past in ribbons of impossible color, carrying them toward a world that had killed everything the galaxy had ever sent to challenge it. In 48 hours, it would meet its first human. The drop pod screamed through Keth 7's atmosphere like a metal comet, its heat shields glowing white-hot as they battled against air so thick with corrosive particles that it resembled liquid fire. Jinwoo Park gripped the restraint harness as violent turbulence threw him against the pod's walls with bone-jarring force. Through the small viewport, he caught glimpses of a world that defied every comfortable assumption about planetary environments. The sky burned in shades of poisonous green and sulfurous yellow, while massive electrical storms danced between floating islands of crystallized gas that drifted through the upper atmosphere like jellyfish made of lightning. Below, continents of black volcanic glass stretched to the horizon, punctuated by geysers of superheated liquid that painted rainbow arcs across the hellish landscape. Atmospheric composition: 78% nitrogen, 19% oxygen, 3% assorted toxins including sulfur compounds and trace radioactive particles. The pod's automated systems announced in a maddeningly cheerful voice. Gravity registers at 1.7 times Earth standard. Surface temperature averaging 42 degrees Celsius with localized hotspots reaching 80 degrees. Air pressure nominal. Probability of sustained human life: 0.001%. Jinwoo would have laughed if he hadn't been, fighting to keep his breakfast down as the pod bucked through another layer of atmospheric turbulence. The galaxy's prison designers had certainly done their homework. Keth 7 wasn't just hostile. It was actively malevolent, as if the planet itself had developed a personal vendetta against the concept of life. The impact came with stunning suddenness. One moment Jinwoo was watching a flock of crystalline creatures, the size of fighter jets, soar past the viewport. their transparent wings cutting through the toxic air with impossible grace. The next, he was eating crash foam as the pod buried itself 30 meters deep in what appeared to be a forest of metallic trees, with edges sharp enough to slice diamond. Emergency systems activated automatically, pumping breathable air into his survival suit while medical scanners assessed his condition. 3 cracked ribs, minor concussion, and a collection of bruises that would make sitting uncomfortable for the next week. By galactic standards for surviving atmospheric entry in a crash pod, he was practically uninjured. The pod's airlock hissed, open, releasing him into an environment that immediately tried to kill him in 17 different ways. The gravity hit first, pressing down on his shoulders like an invisible weight vest loaded with lead. Each step required conscious effort, and he could feel his cardiovascular system working overtime to pump blood through his body. The air tasted of copper and ozone, with an underlying chemical burn that made his throat feel raw after the first breath. But it was the ground beneath his feet that truly drove home how alien this world was. What he had initially mistaken for, soil, was actually a writhing mass of microscopic organisms that immediately began attempting to dissolve the synthetic materials of his boots. Tiny tendrils, each no thicker than a human hair, reached up from the living carpet to probe at his suit's seals, searching for weaknesses with the patient persistence of a billion-year evolutionary arms race. Jinwoo took a cautious step forward and watched as his footprint began smoking behind him. The organisms in the ground weren't just aggressive, they were sophisticated, adapting their chemical attacks in real time as they analyzed the foreign materials they encountered. "Well," he muttered, his voice muffled by the suit's breathing. "Apparatus. This is going to be interesting." The metallic forest stretched in all directions, its tree analogs reaching toward the burning sky like silver spears. Each trunk was covered in what appeared to be natural circuitry, glowing conduits that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. As Jinwoo watched, patterns of light raced up and down the trees in complex sequences, as if the entire forest was engaged in some vast, incomprehensible conversation. He had been studying the light patterns for perhaps 10 minutes when the first predator found him. The creature emerged from between the metallic trees with the fluid grace of a nightmare-given form. It stood nearly 3 meters tall at the shoulder, its body covered in crystalline plates that refracted the strange light into rainbow patterns across its surface. 6 legs ended in claws that looked capable of rending starship hull plating, while its head bore a resemblance to something between a praying mantis and a dragon, complete with mandibles that dripped with luminescent acid. For a moment, predator and human regarded each other across 20 meters of hostile terrain. Jinwoo could see his reflection multiplied 100 times in the creature's compound eyes, each facet analyzing him with alien intelligence. The beast's head tilted slightly, as if trying to categorize this strange new form of prey. Back aboard the monitoring station in orbit, Corrections Officer Tae-min Lee watched the biometric readouts with growing concern. Jinwoo's heart rate had spiked briefly upon encountering the indigenous life form, but rather than continuing to climb toward panic levels, it was actually beginning to decrease. "That's not normal," Tae-min whispered to himself, checking the equipment for malfunctions. Every previous exile to Keth 7 had died within hours of deployment, usually from heart failure brought on by sheer terror. The planet's ecosystem had evolved predators specifically designed to inspire maximum psychological trauma in their prey before consumption. On the planet's surface, Jinwoo was reaching a very different conclusion about his situation. The creature before him was certainly dangerous, but it was also beautiful in its own alien way. More importantly, it was hesitating. Predators that had evolved in an environment where everything was dangerous didn't hesitate. They struck fast and hard, or they became prey themselves. The creature's mandibles clicked together in a rapid staccato pattern, and Jinwoo realized it was attempting to communicate. Not with words, obviously, but with the universal language of territorial dispute. The clicking grew more aggressive, accompanied by a display of acid-dripping fangs and razor-sharp claws. Jinwoo's response was to slowly reach into his survival kit and extract a titanium steel emergency tool, its multifunction design, including everything from cutting implements to pry bars. The tool's weight felt reassuring in his hands, and he could see his own reflection in its polished surface. The creature's clicking suddenly stopped. Its head tilted further, compound eyes focusing on the tool with what Jin Woo could only interpret as confusion. Here was prey that wasn't running, prey that wasn't cowering. Prey that was, in fact, adopting an aggressive stance with what appeared to be a weapon. In the billion-year history of Keth-7's ecosystem, this had never happened before. The attack came with lightning speed, the creature launching itself across the intervening space with impossible grace despite its size. Acid sprayed from its mandibles as claws extended toward Jin Woo's chest, each talon aimed at vital organs with surgical precision. Jin Woo dropped into a combat crouch he had learned during his mandatory military service 20 years ago, letting the creature's momentum carry it over his position, while the emergency tool found the gap between two crystalline plates just behind the beast's left shoulder. The titanium steel edge, designed to cut through starship bulkheads in emergency situations, punched through the creature's carapace with surprising ease. The predator's death scream shattered several of the nearby metallic trees, their crystalline trunks cracking under the sonic assault. Bioluminescent fluid fountained from the wound as the creature crashed to the ground, its 6 legs thrashing in progressively weaker spasms until finally falling still. Jin Woo stood over his kill, breathing hard but very much alive. The emergency tool in his hand was smoking from contact with the creature's acidic blood, but the weapon had held together long enough to do its job. Around him, the forest had fallen silent. Even the microscopic organisms in the ground seemed to have paused their constant assault on his equipment, as if the entire ecosystem was reassessing this unexpected variable in its ancient equations. Jin Woo looked down at the dead predator, then up at the burning sky where he knew Tae-Min Lee was monitoring his vital signs from orbit. A slow smile spread across his face as he considered his next move. "Day 1 on the galaxy's worst Deathworld," he said aloud, his voice carrying clearly, in the toxic air. "Time to find some shelter." As he began examining the creature's corpse for useful materials, Jin Woo couldn't help but think that Keth-7 had just made its first serious mistake. It had tried to scare him. Instead, it had just provided him with his first set of building materials. 3 weeks after his arrival on Keth-7, Jin Woo Park had fundamentally altered the rules of survival on the galaxy's most hostile world. What had begun as a desperate scramble for shelter had evolved into something approaching domestic comfort, though any galactic observer would have been hard-pressed to recognize the transformation as anything other than controlled madness. The crystalline predator that had provided his first victory now served as the foundation of his home. Jin Woo had discovered that the creature's carapace, once properly treated with acidic secretions from local plant analogs, formed an impermeable barrier against Keth-7's corrosive atmosphere. The beast's hollow interior had been meticulously carved out and reinforced, creating a multi-chamber dwelling that would have impressed military engineers back on Earth. The main living space featured furniture carved from the bones of increasingly exotic creatures that had tested their luck against the human intruder. A workbench constructed from the ribcage of something resembling a metallic whale held an impressive array of tools, each one crafted from materials that would have killed most galactic species through mere contact. Jin Woo's latest creation was a set of eating utensils made from crystallized venom, extracted from a plant that existed solely to cause maximum agony to anything that touched it. Dr. Wu Jin Kang, the xenobiologist assigned to monitor the exile from the safety of orbital distance, found himself filing reports that bordered on the fantastical. His initial observations had focused on documenting another failed attempt at Keth-7 colonization. Instead, he was witnessing the birth of an entirely new ecosystem dynamic. Subject continues to demonstrate unprecedented adaptation rates, he dictated to his recording device, his voice tight with professional disbelief. Local flora and fauna are exhibiting behavioral modifications that contradict millions of years of evolutionary programming. The howling vines of Sector 7 Delta have ceased their characteristic territorial aggression and appear to be cooperating with the human subject in some form of symbiotic relationship. The howling vines had been Jin Woo's second major breakthrough. These plant creatures, named for their habit of producing subsonic frequencies that liquefied the internal organs of most carbon-based life forms, had initially posed a significant threat to his expanding territory. Their ability to move through underground route networks allowed them to appear anywhere within a 50-kilometer radius, turning simple food-gathering expeditions into elaborate tactical operations. Jin Wu's solution had been characteristically direct. Rather than avoiding the vines, he had spent a week studying their behavioral patterns, mapping their underground network, and analyzing the chemical composition of their root systems. The breakthrough had come when he realized that the plant's aggression was triggered by specific pheromone signatures associated with fear and desperation. Humans, as it turned out, produced a completely different chemical profile when they were annoyed rather than terrified. The first vine that had erupted from the ground to attack him during his morning exercise routine had been met not with panic, but with irritation at the interruption. Instead of the expected fear pheromones, Jin Wu had been broadcasting what the vine's primitive nervous systems interpreted as confusion and mild hostility. The plant had hesitated, its attack pattern disrupted by sensory input it had never encountered in millions of years of evolution. That hesitation had been enough for Jin Wu to grab the vine's main tendril and introduce it to his latest tool, a cutting implement forged from the crystallized stomach acid of his first kill. The vine's death had apparently communicated something profound to the rest of the network, because the surviving plants had begun exhibiting behavior that Dr. Kang could only classify as cautious curiosity. Now, 3 weeks later, the howling vines served as an early warning system for Jin Wu's territory, their subsonic communications alerting him to the approach of potential threats while simultaneously discouraging smaller predators from venturing too close to his domain. The morning of his 22nd day on Keth 7 brought Jin Wu his greatest challenge yet. He had been expanding his food preservation systems, working on a method to smoke-cure meat using the naturally occurring sulfur compounds in the atmosphere, when his vine network began transmitting alarm signals, unlike anything he had previously experienced. The source of their distress became apparent when a shadow fell across his compound. Looking up through the transparent aluminum viewport he had installed in his dwelling's roof, Jin Wu saw something that made even his adaptable mind struggle to process the information. The creature descending from the toxic sky was easily the size of a small spacecraft, its body a flowing amalgamation of crystalline plates and organic tissue that seemed to shift between solid and gaseous states. Multiple sets of wings generated localized gravitational fields that allowed it to maneuver through the dense atmosphere with impossible grace, while hundreds of sensory organs covering its surface tracked everything within a 20-kilometer radius. Dr. Kang's voice crackled through the orbital monitoring station's emergency channels as he observed the creature's approach. Great Cosmic Void, it's a Seer-class apex predator. Subject Jin Wu, if you can hear this transmission, you need to implement emergency shelter protocols immediately. That thing hunts by analyzing the electromagnetic signatures of its prey's neural activity. It can literally read your thoughts from a distance of... The transmission cut off as the creature's massive form settled onto the ground 50 meters from Jin Wu's compound, its landing sending shockwaves through the crystalline forest that shattered several of the smaller metallic trees. For a moment that stretched into eternity, predator and human regarded each other across the hellish landscape. Jin Wu felt the creature's mental probe brush against his consciousness like fingers made of ice and starlight. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a violation of mental privacy so profound that it should have driven him insane with terror. Instead, he found himself analyzing the creature's technique with the same methodical approach he applied to every other problem Keth 7 had presented. The Seer-class predator was attempting to map his neural pathways, searching for the specific patterns of electrical activity that would indicate fear, desperation, or submission. What it found instead was something that had never existed in its hunting grounds before. A mind that was not afraid of death, but merely inconvenienced by the interruption to its daily routine. The creature's probe withdrew with what Jin Wu could only interpret as confusion. Through the transparent aluminum of his viewport, he watched as the massive predator's hundreds of sensory organs focused on his dwelling, analyzing the materials and construction techniques with growing bewilderment. This was not the desperate shelter of cornered prey. This was a permanent residence built by something that intended to stay. Jin Wu reached for his latest creation, a spear tipped with a crystallized neurotoxin extracted from the howling vine's root network. The weapon had taken him 3 days to craft, its shaft carved from the leg bone of a creature whose species name translated roughly to the thing that eats hope. The spearhead itself was a work of art, its surface etched with channels that would deliver the neurotoxin directly into an opponent's circulatory system. The seer-class predator's mental probe touched his thoughts again, this time seeking to understand why its prey was preparing to attack rather than flee. What it discovered was a human mind that had spent 3 weeks cataloging the weaknesses of every creature it had encountered, mapping the vulnerable points where crystalline armor met organic tissue, and developing increasingly sophisticated methods of turning Keth-7's hostile environment into a weapon. For the first time in its million-year existence, the apex predator of Keth-7 felt something it had no name for: uncertainty. Jinwoo stepped out of his compound, spear in hand, and offered the creature what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Let's keep this civilized," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the toxic air. "I've got a schedule to keep." The battle that followed would be discussed in xenobiological journals for centuries to come, though Dr. Kang's orbital recordings would be classified at the highest levels of galactic security. What remained unclassified was the simple fact that when the dust settled, Jinwoo Park was still standing, and Keth-7 had gained its first human apex predator. The galaxy's deadliest world had just learned that some prey were more dangerous than their predators. The rescue fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Keth-7 system, with all the precision of a military operation, which it technically wasn't, though Captain Ari Han had assembled her crew from the finest soldiers the human colonial authority could provide without officially acknowledging their mission. 12 ships ranging from fast attack corvettes to a converted heavy cruiser packed with medical facilities represented humanity's most sophisticated attempt to challenge the galaxy's ultimate prison world. "Orbital scans confirm one human life sign planetside," reported Lieutenant Nari Song from the sensor station, her voice carefully neutral. "Biometrics indicate the subject is not only alive but appears to be in excellent physical condition." Captain Han studied the tactical display with growing amazement. The life sign wasn't hiding in some cave or desperately clinging to survival in the crashed drop pod. Instead, it was moving with purpose across the planet's surface, following what appeared to be established patrol routes through territory that the galactic databases classified as immediate death zone, no exceptions. "Ma'am," called out Sergeant Bo-Min Cho from the communications array, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's unusual." "Define unusual, Sergeant." "It's an invitation to dinner." The message that crackled through the fleet's speakers carried Jinwoo Park's voice across the void with remarkable clarity, considering it was being broadcast from a world where most technology failed within hours of deployment. "Human Colonial Authority vessels, this is President Jinwoo Park of the Free Republic of New Seoul. You're welcome to join me for the evening meal, but please observe standard diplomatic protocols when entering sovereign airspace. My security council gets nervous around unannounced military formations." Captain Han exchanged glances with her senior staff. In the 3 months since Jinwoo's exile, they had planned for every contingency except the possibility that he might have established his own government. "Security Council?" she asked the empty air. The answer came 30 minutes later as their landing shuttles descended through Keth-7's turbulent atmosphere under escort from creatures that defied every principle of xenobiology. Crystalline flyers the size of fighter jets moved in perfect formation around the human craft, their transparent wings cutting through the toxic air while maintaining communication through bioluminescent patterns that pulsed along their bodies in complex sequences. Lieutenant Daeun Kim, piloting the lead shuttle, found herself following flight paths marked by towering spires of cultivated crystal that rose from the planet's surface like organic skyscrapers. The structures pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns as their escorts, creating a navigation system more sophisticated than anything in the Human Colonial Authority's databases. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Minho Lee, the mission's xenobiologist. "Those are seer-class apex predators. They don't cooperate with other species. They don't even cooperate with each other. The galactic databases list them as Solitary super predators with extreme territorial aggression. Tell that to them, Lieutenant Kim replied, watching as one of the creatures performed what could only be described as an aerial salute before, peeling away to resume its patrol pattern. The landing zone had been carved from what was once a forest of metallic trees, though the stumps had been carefully shaped into a geometric pattern that served both aesthetic and defensive purposes. Captain Han's tactical eye immediately recognized the design principles: overlapping fields of fire, multiple escape routes, and choke points that would funnel attackers into predetermined kill zones. But it was the welcoming committee that truly tested her ability to process unexpected information. Jin-Woo Park stood at the center of the landing zone wearing what appeared to be formal diplomatic attire, crafted entirely from materials that should have killed him through proximity exposure. His jacket was woven from the silk of creatures whose venom could dissolve starship hulls, while his ceremonial sash displayed trophies taken from predators that had never before been successfully hunted. Most striking was the crown resting on his head, a circlet of crystallized neural tissue taken from the Seer-class predator, whose massive skull now served as the centerpiece of his compound's architecture. Flanking him were representatives of what he had apparently designated as his cabinet. A pack of six-legged wolf analogs sat at perfect attention, their crystalline fur groomed to mirror brightness, and their eyes displaying an intelligence that made Captain Han's tactical officers reach instinctively for their weapons. Behind them, a grove of howling vines had arranged themselves into what could only be described as an honor guard, their normally aggressive subsonic emanations replaced by harmonic frequencies that sounded almost ceremonial. "Captain Han," Jin-Woo called, out as the rescue team disembarked from their shuttles. "Welcome to New Seoul. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Mr. Park," she replied, fighting to maintain military composure while her xenobiologist muttered increasingly frantic observations into his recording device. "We're here to extract you from this hostile environment and return you to human space." "Extract?" Jin-Woo's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Captain, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm afraid that's not possible. I have responsibilities here." As if summoned by his words, a delegation of creatures emerged from the crystal spires surrounding the landing zone. Captain Han found herself face-to-face with representatives of species that existed in galactic databases only as cautionary tales and horror stories. Yet here they were, moving with obvious intelligence and purpose, their hostile attention focused, not on the human visitors but on the surrounding perimeter in clear protective formations. "You've domesticated them?" Dr. Lee asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Domesticated is the wrong word," Jin-Woo replied thoughtfully. "We've reached an understanding. They provide security and assistance with large-scale construction projects. In return, I provide strategic planning and defense against external threats." "External threats?" Captain Han asked. "What could threaten creatures like these?" Jin-Woo's expression grew serious as he gestured toward the burning sky. "The same thing that threatens every intelligent species in the galaxy, Captain. Stagnation. These creatures have been locked in the same evolutionary patterns for millions of years, perfecting the art of killing everything that enters their territory. I've given them something they never had before, a reason to build instead of just destroy." He led them through his compound, past workshops where creatures that should have been mortal enemies worked together on projects that combined organic engineering with crystalline technology. The air hummed with productive energy as massive predators carefully manipulated delicate instruments under human supervision, their natural aggression channeled into constructive purposes. The mining operations alone are producing rare minerals at rates that would revolutionize galactic industry, Jin-Woo explained as they passed a facility where acid-breathing creatures were carefully extracting precious metals from the planet's crust. The agricultural experiments are yielding crops that can grow in previously uninhabitable environments. And the defense capabilities. He gestured toward the sky, where their escort of crystalline flyers had been joined by creatures that defied classification. Some appeared to be living weapons, their bodies adapted for space combat, while others resembled organic starships capable of faster-than-light travel through means that human science couldn't begin to explain. "Mr. Park," Captain Han said slowly. How many colonists could this world support? With proper planning and infrastructure development? Jinwoo considered the question seriously. Conservative estimates suggest around 50 million, assuming we maintain current ecological balance. Optimistic projections put the number closer to 200 million, if we're willing to expand into the ocean territories. The implications hit Captain Han like a physical blow. Keth 7 wasn't just a Deathworld anymore. It was potentially the most valuable real estate in known space, defended by creatures that had never lost a battle and governed by a human who had somehow convinced the galaxy's most dangerous predators to become his willing allies. Captain, Jinwoo continued, his voice taking on a formal tone that suggested he was speaking for the record. I hereby formally request that the Human Colonial Authority recognize the sovereign independence of New Seoul and establish formal, diplomatic relations. We're prepared to offer trade agreements, defensive alliances, and technological exchanges that would benefit both our peoples. Captain Han looked around at the impossible paradise that Jinwoo had carved from the galaxy's ultimate nightmare, then at her own crew who were staring at the transformation with expressions of awe and disbelief. Mr. President, she said finally, I think we need to have a very long conversation about the future of human space. As if in response to her words, the crystalline spires surrounding the compound began pulsing with new patterns of light, and Captain Han realized that every creature on the planet was listening to their discussion with keen interest. The galaxy's deadliest world had just announced its intention to join galactic civilization on its own terms. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos, with representatives from 12 major species shouting over each other in languages that their translation matrices struggled to render coherently. At the center of the crystalline chamber, a holographic display showed live footage from Keth 7 that challenged every assumption about planetary habitability, predator behavior, and the fundamental nature of ecosystem management. Council Speaker Velterra's tentacles writhed in patterns that indicated severe psychological distress as she reviewed the reports flooding in from across the galaxy. Order! We will have order in this chamber. Her neural interface broadcast calming pheromones, but even her species' advanced emotional regulation techniques seemed inadequate for the current crisis. Ambassador Hyejin Kim stood at the human delegation's podium, her diplomatic credentials having been hastily upgraded to emergency plenipotentiary, when the Colonial Authority realized the magnitude of what Jinwoo Park had accomplished. Behind her, a small army of legal experts, xenobiologists, and military advisors provided real-time analysis of the situation developing on humanity's newest world. The facts are simple, Ambassador Kim announced, her voice cutting through the multilingual chaos with diplomatic precision. 3 months ago, this council sentenced a human citizen to exile on Keth 7 as punishment for an accidental environmental violation. That citizen has not only survived but has established a functioning government with formal territorial claims, defensive capabilities, and diplomatic intentions. Impossible, screeched the lead Villani representative, their crystalline form, shifting through aggressive color spectrums. Nothing survives on Keth 7. The ecosystem is specifically designed to eliminate all foreign contamination. Perhaps you should inform the ecosystem of that, Kim replied dryly, gesturing toward the holographic display where Jinwoo Park was conducting what appeared to be a cabinet meeting with representatives of 6 different apex predator species. President Park has submitted formal documentation claiming sovereignty over the entire Keth 7 system, including mining rights, defensive territories, and exclusive colonization permits. The legal implications sent ripples of panic through the assembled delegates. Keth 7's strategic location controlled 3 major hyperspace routes, while its mineral wealth had been considered inaccessible due to the planet's hostile environment. If humans could not only survive there but actually thrive, the balance of galactic power would shift dramatically. Dr. Sunho Yang, Director of Xenobiological Studies at the Colonial Authority's primary research facility, stepped forward to present his preliminary analysis. Honorable Council members, our observations indicate that the human subject has achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. He has successfully integrated himself into an apex predator ecosystem, not as prey but as a symbiotic partner. The holographic display shifted to show footage of Jin Woo working alongside creatures that had previously existed only in galactic nightmares. Seer-class predators manipulated complex crystalline structures under his direction, while howling. Vine served as a planetary communication network that coordinated resource distribution across entire continents. The subject has essentially become the central nervous system of a planet-wide superorganism, Dr. Yang continued. Every major predator species has integrated into his governmental structure, creating a defensive capability that rivals the combined military forces of the inner worlds. Council Speaker Veltara's form had shifted to colors indicating deep concern. What are his terms? Ambassador Kim smiled, recognizing the question as an implicit acknowledgement of Jin Woo's legitimacy. President Park's demands are remarkably reasonable. Recognition of territorial sovereignty, establishment of formal diplomatic relations, and permission for controlled human colonization of Keth-7. In exchange, he offers trade agreements for rare minerals, technological exchanges regarding ecosystem management, and defensive alliance treaties. Defensive alliance? The question came from the Thakari representative, whose species had originally attempted to use Keth-7 as a prison world. What could they possibly defend against? The answer came in the form of new sensor data streaming in from the galactic periphery. Long-range scouts had detected massive fleets moving through uncharted space toward the civilized sectors, their energy signatures unlike anything in current databases. The timing of their appearance, just as humanity established its first truly independent stronghold, struck many council members as more than coincidental. Unknown contacts approaching from the void between galaxies, announced the council's military advisor, their mechanical voice cutting through the diplomatic chatter. Estimated arrival in core systems, 6 months. Defensive capabilities, unknown, but substantial. Jin Woo's image appeared on the main display as he addressed the council directly from his crystalline throne room, flanked by creatures that represented millions of years of evolutionary perfection in the art of warfare. Honorable council members, my scouts have been tracking these vessels for several weeks. I believe we can offer each other mutual assistance in the coming conflict. Your scouts? Council Speaker Veltara asked, her curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. Space-adapted variants of the local ecosystem, Jin Woo replied casually.
Keth-7's predators have evolved several species capable of faster-than-light travel. They've been mapping potential threats to their territory for some time now. The revelation that Keth-7's ecosystem included natural starships sent another wave of shock through the assembled delegates.
The planet wasn't just a death world. It was a fortress that had been preparing for galactic war since before most current civilizations had achieved sentience. Ambassador Kim seized the moment to present humanity's formal proposal. The human. Colonial authority moves for immediate recognition of the Free Republic of New Seoul as a sovereign member state of the Galactic Council. President Park has demonstrated effective governance, territorial control, and the ability to contribute meaningfully to galactic defense. The debate that followed would be remembered as one of the most contentious in Council history. Species that had spent millennia maintaining careful balances of power suddenly faced the prospect of a human world, defended by creatures that had never lost a battle, governed by someone who had convinced natural weapons of mass destruction to serve as cabinet ministers. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than anyone had predicted. 7 species voted in favor, 4 opposed, and 1 abstained. By the narrowest possible margin, humanity had gained its first truly independent world. On Keth-7, Jin Woo Park received the news while reviewing construction plans for the planet's first spaceport. Around him, his cabinet of apex predators pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that indicated satisfaction and anticipation. The galaxy had finally acknowledged what the Deathworld's ecosystem had already accepted. Humans weren't just another species to be managed and contained. They were partners in the ancient art of survival. Congratulations, Mr. President, Captain Han said as she approached his throne, having accepted his offer to serve as the planet's first human military advisor. What's our first official act as a sovereign world? Jinwoo smiled as he gestured toward the star charts displaying the approaching unknown fleets. We prepare to welcome our new neighbors to the galaxy. I have a feeling they're going to be very surprised by what they find here. Above them, the crystalline spires that served as New Soul's communications network began pulsing with complex patterns that reached across space to touch the minds of creatures on distant worlds. The message was simple but profound. Keth 7 was no longer just a Deathworld. It was humanity's first fortress among the stars, defended by allies that had been waiting millions of years for someone worthy of their partnership. The galaxy would never underestimate humans again.